"Oh my god, this is crazy! For so long these two contestants were dancing around each other, and now this! The Federal German Constitutional Court hit the European Court of Justice with the ultra-virus chair. It is a climax of a long-fought battle between these high-ranking justice warriors." If you have no clue what I'm talking about, you might not be the only one. But I assure you that this clash between these two courts is actually a major deal for the EU, because it touches a core problem of how Europe is actually functioning, or better, not functioning. And this is best explained in a way how kids were taught in the 90s about brotherhood and betrayal, wrestling. So let's get ready to delve into deep juridical terms.
Oh yeah!
So how does it actually come that the EU's highest court battles with Germany's highest court? Because intuitively you would think the EU is supranational, so it's above the national court, and thus it would have the last say. But the thing is that the EU, and thus its court, does only have competences in certain policy areas, like market competition or monetary policy. And furthermore, it was never written down in the treaties that the European Court actually stands above the national courts. The European Court just assumed it did, and it worked out in a way. You know, the national judges and the European judges were battling against each other, they were flipping each other through tables, jumping from ladders, but behind the scenes they were all doing it for the rule of law and further European integration. So it's basically like wrestlers. They do it for the show, but backstage they are actually quite fine. Even though some people don't believe this. And so at one point, the German court feared that the European court may overstep its competences. And thus they unpacked a chair, the ultra-virus chair. Ultra-virus means that a court oversteps its competences and in this case threatens German law. And when this happens, German judges argued, they may reject European rulings. And this chair was more of a threat and not many people thought the Germans would actually use it. But actually exactly this happened now. The Germans took out the chair and hit the European Court of Justice. But actually the European judges were taking a hit for someone else they were protecting, the European Central Bank. Because the European Central Bank for some years now is lending money to governments, which is very controversial and some people actually launched a complaint about it. So the European Central Bank said it did so to keep inflation at around 2% because, well, honestly, they always say this because their main mandate is price stability, and price stability means keeping inflation at 2%. So whenever the European Central Bank issues a new program, they say it's for the 2% goal. And the European Court was fine with it. But the German court said, "No chance in hell!" The German judges argue, when the central bankers lend money to governments, they do not only execute monetary policy, which would be fine because in their competence, but they would neglect the effects on economic policy, which is not in their competence. So the effect is, when the European Central Bank now listens to the German court, it would dismiss the European court. And if it doesn't listen to the German court, it would make it illegal for Germany to participate in the European Central Bank's program. And this would mean the biggest economy in Europe is missing, and this would probably endanger the existence of the euro. So that is why a lot of jurists are actually trying to find a solution for this. Because, as you may think, law is a bit tiny more complex than wrestling. But the real problem is, why does the referee actually allow the use of a chair? Well, Because there is not one referee, but 27 of them. The European member states, and they together have to make the rules. If they want to ban chairs, they can do so by changing the treaties. They could give the European Central Bank a wider mandate, for example, not only price stability, but for jobs or climate protection, and thus it would make the use of the chair less likely. But this wouldn't be even the best solution, because the European Central Bank isn't the one who should execute economic policies. Elected politicians should do this. And this is possible, because in the EU wrestling world, the governments of the member states are not only making the rules, they are not only the referees, they are fighting themselves. But they are not fighting for the European interest, they are fighting mostly for their own national interests. And this was best seen during the Euro crisis Royal Rumble, where the rule was you lose when you get kicked out of the ring. The central bank did whatever it took to protect the euro, the common currency. But the member states did only as much as they absolutely had to. Yes, they lent money to states in crisis, but they didn't form a political union with like a finance minister or a European treasury, which would make sense because when you have a common currency, you should have a common economic policy. But they did not do it, and they're still not doing it. And this is why the European Central Bank is really stretching its mandate to protect the euro. And it is supported by the European Court of Justice. And for this, the European Court of Justice is now hit with a chair. So this whole clash of the court is actually not the main event, it's a side story. The real match is a cage match where all European countries are together and they have to put away their national interests and act in the common European interest to escape the cage and win the match. And what countless hours of wrestling taught me is, it is not helping when you hit each others with chairs.
And that's the bottom line, 'cause Stone Cold said so.